Lindsay, thank you very much for being our guest today on the Fluent English Pro podcast.
Thank you for having me. Pleasure to be here.
Okay, I'm glad to have you here. I always love to have other language nerds on the show because
Yeah,
you understand the mechanics of learning a language and like what the best path is and what the common mistakes and misconceptions are. You have a background in applied linguistics, which I love. That's great. I have a background in linguistics myself. And you work as a language consultant. You help people learn languages. So that's
exactly.
great. And we're going to be talking about that. But like before we dive into the topic of today's episode, which is how to get over a plateau. Yes, for those listening, a plateau is like you're stuck. You're stuck in your language learning journey. You don't see any progress. You want to move forward. You don't know how to do it. So you have hit a plateau. A plateau is like a flat line. Before we jump into that topic, tell us a little bit more about yourself. How did you end up becoming a language expert and a language coach in a way?
Good question. I like the way you ask it rather than just tell me about yourself, because it is very much piece by piece kind of led me to where I am now. And so in terms of learning languages, everything started primary school. I was like 8 or 9 years old. I went to French club because they gave us croissants at the end of term. That was it. That was my motivation. That was enough as a kid. I will keep going to keep getting the croissants. And it wasn't really until I was like 13, having to pick choices for exam subjects, when I wanted to do Spanish because Shakira, fellow Colombian, had released
Yeah.
Laundry Service, first English language album with the Spanish and English versions of some of those same songs. And I was like, this is cool. If I've learned French, why can't I learn Spanish? I've done it once, I can do it again. But my school said, if you're going to do this new language, you need to keep doing French to prove that you can learn languages. So I just ended up with both because I wanted to do Spanish that much. And from there, it just kind of snowballed. Like every time when, like, for example, when I was picking my university options, I did distance learning part-time. And that first year was for French and Spanish, everything I had just done. So I was like, okay, why not? Let's do Italian and Chinese, right? So I just kept piece by piece, just gradually learning more. And then halfway through my degree, well, actually around about the same time I started, I had started working in a school because I thought, what can you do with languages? What can I do with languages? What do I want to do? And I thought about teaching. And so I found this job working in a school, learning support assistant. I was going to get to sit in on all these language classes. I thought, this is great. But of course, you finish really early and the pay is rubbish. So 3:30, I'd be like, well, now what do I do with the rest of my day? And so I started doing some tutoring, like private tuition, driving around to people's homes, teaching French, teaching Spanish. And then a couple of years after that, I went out fully on my own and did the tuition business like full time. A couple of years after that, moved online. But I was beginning to notice the same trend with all my students, whether it was in person or online, where we'd show up, once a week. And I'd say, so how's it going? And they say, this week I got busy and I haven't really had a chance to do much on what we practice. And okay. So I was noticing there was this gap between teacher showing up here and teacher showing up a week later. And that was the piece that was missing from all that I could give in that 1 hour that I could teach of the language. It was the how to learn that was really missing. And I thought, this is missing consistently. Like even, from school, Monday morning, you get the vocab list. Friday, you've got the test. That's all you're given. You're not told, how do we learn these words, kids? So I thought, okay, I'm kind of interested in this. And also it means I get to work with learners of any language, which is great.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Yeah. So it's not just the language itself, is like the dynamics of how you learn it. In case you don't have the help of a tutor, for example, or you don't know what step to take next, you're going to have more clarity on what to do. So I really like that. And that's a good point that addresses or that connects very well to today's episode, which is, what do I do when I feel I'm not progressing anymore? I took a course, and of course my English level improved, but it's been 6 months or 8 months, and I feel the same. Yeah, I don't feel any
Mm.
progress, or I feel maybe progress has slowed down. Why does this happen?
Yeah. Well, first of all, it's really important to say that it does happen pretty much to everyone learning a language. So it's nothing to do with you learning wrong. I think that's really important that we start there, because it often makes us feel like we've got as far as we can go. I've done as much as I can do. Maybe I'm not meant, I don't have the magic talent or the key to just unlock the next level of English. I guess this is where I stop. It's not what it has to mean at all. So I really want to start from that point. And also, a plateau festival can happen at any level, but typically we're talking about intermediate level. So when you first start learning a language, you learn one word and you know 100% more than you did yesterday when you knew zero. Okay. You then learn two words and that percentage is going down. Boom, 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 every time. And then it will get to a point where it does feel like a flat line, because we've gone from our increase in knowledge being massive to it suddenly being much more granular. And also, by the time we get to that point, typically we know the words that we're going to use most frequently. So we can get by in a lot of situations, especially if we're talking about intermediate plateau. We can get by perfectly fine. So we really need to be very intentional with what we do next to ensure that we can move beyond that and not stagnate at that stage. Another thing is, it's really important that if we want to move forward from there, we're getting enough output. Typically, we're talking about speaking. Writing as well. Writing is a good way to get more speaking. But typically, for most people, speaking is the end goal. And that requires real emotional risk. It's very vulnerable to speak in a language that is not your own language. A really, really vulnerable act that we don't always acknowledge. And we're therefore much more tempted to avoid it. We avoid it until we need it. And if we do that, if we're not getting the speaking practice and we're only speaking when it's 100% necessary, then we're not going to continue to progress further, because we're just managing, right? And that's really, we're wanting those big leaps, but that momentum is really going to come from just these micro breakthroughs, these small wins along the way. It's like, sounds really cheesy, but a beach doesn't exist without many, many grains of sand. And that's what it's like here. It's just those tiny, tiny wins we need to then make the level much higher.
Okay. Oh my god, I'm glad that you touched on a lot of points I had in mind. So I'm just gonna try to recap and address that.
There
I
was
don't
a
know if
lot
you've
there.
heard no, but that's great. That's great. I don't know if you've heard of the law of diminishing returns.
Right.
I think this is the same thing. Yes, when you start from zero, you have everything to learn. That's why progress seems so evident. But the more you progress, yes, the more you learn. Like you can put in the same amount of time and effort, but you're gonna feel like, and I emphasize feel because it's a perception, not a reality, that
Yes.
you are progressing less because you have already advanced a great deal. And now, like, more effort doesn't necessarily mean more progress, it's slower. And I like that you point out and you bring out the metaphor of the grains of salt in at the beach, because it is normal that you are not going to see these huge leaps of progress as you might have seen at your beginner stage. It's like the little things that count. Is the little things, like, and some, like, many times, most of the times, without even realizing, yeah, that new expression, that new idiom, that new structure that you didn't know you absorbed by maybe interacting with somebody else. Now you're using it. So it's those little granular, sometimes unnoticeable things that contribute to your level. So I'm really happy that you brought that to the conversation. And also the part of okay, I have a question here, and I agree. It's like going to the gym. Yes, you can exercise to keep or to stay at the level you're at, or you can, like, push yourself harder.
Yeah.
Will it help also if we try to dive deeper into like more specialized language? Lindsay, for example, if I'm like, we learn general English at the institute, you say general English. So maybe if I have a hobby, for example, if I like playing the guitar and I dive deep into all the language and all the like intricacies or like vocabulary expressions of that particular field, or maybe for my profession, I dive deep into that. Will that help me move forward in that kind of plateau I am perceiving?
It can do, but I think it's a really common idea that to go from intermediate plateau to advanced, we need to suddenly be looking at specific areas of niche vocab.
Okay.
Because if we're looking at specific areas of niche vocab that have no relation to our lives and that we're very unlikely to use, then maybe we can talk about that random topic, but when are we going to talk about it, right? So what you want to be thinking is, well, what do I want to talk about in more detail? Because a lot of the time, rather than expanding into these sorts of niche vocab groups, being able to then talk about anything and everything, is it more a case that we want to talk about the things that we already talk about, but with more depth and more nuance and more accuracy,
Mm.
right? So, for example, if let's say you are a chef and you talk about food a lot, right? Being able to describe that food with an extra layer of advanced vocabulary, that makes a lot of sense. To be able to say that the apple is crisp and delicious because it is such and such a type of apple and it was grown in this season and this, to be able to really get into that level, that's more relevant to you. So that's going to help you to move beyond the plateau, because you'll be getting the practice, because you're saying the things that we want to say. Like we said about the speaking practice is how we move beyond the intermediate plateau. And if that's more relevant to us, the practice that we're doing, then we're going to be moving beyond that faster and getting to a place where we're more comfortable. Because a lot of the general kind of building work, the scaffolding of language, the grammar is the same. The grammar ends. This is,
Yeah.
people are always like, oh, grammar sucks. Oh, grammar's so boring. I hate grammar. Grammar ends. Like, you will get to a point where you will know all the grammar. That is so good. That's such a good feeling, to think that one day that's going to be it. It's just going to be a case of practicing it and using it, but you'll know it all. Like, how good is that? The vocab will keep going. So making sure that you know the grammar, like, fuller before we really get into the niche topics, I feel like that's a more useful approach as we want to move beyond.
Would you say, Lindsay, that also like improving your communication skills is part of moving like away from that plateau? Because like you have the structure, but then you have to be able to use the structure, as you just mentioned, in a more nuanced way with more like detail or more specific information. And so like, and you also have like how to interact with people, because like you don't interact through grammar, you interact through meaning. Yes. Like you read other
Yeah.
aspects of the conversation, such as like body language and that kind of thing. So what part of our communication skills do you think influence moving out of that plateau?
That's a good point that you bring up about beyond grammar, right? Because those communication skills, yes, vocab and grammar are going to help you be able to say more, but to communicate more, it's a deeper level that doesn't always get talked about. It's stuff like, pragmatics and like being able to understand like the kind of cultural context of why people are doing what they're doing or saying what they're saying in that certain way, and how you can or should respond. That kind of stuff that you've probably picked up until now. If you're at an intermediate plateau, you've probably got a decent grasp on, like, I guess we could call it the vibe for a very sort of untechnical term, but you've probably got a good grasp of the vibe of that language, And so how can you now begin to communicate in that way more yourself? You probably understand it when people are speaking to you with that. How can you now put that into practice yourself? So as well as vocab, grammar, there is that extra element of communication, which is beyond words. It's the stuff that's not said. It's the body language, it's the gesture, it's the tone, it's the face, all of that you'll begin to really think more about at this stage that will help with communication a lot.
Yeah, if I may, I will also include culture, because there are so many expressions and so many like ideas that you share that need culture so you can understand and share, like get the
Right.
context of what it is about.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's so vast as well. You know what always I find so curious is when you're learning Portuguese, typically you might see in the bookshop Brazilian Portuguese, European Portuguese book, right? When you're learning Spanish, you'll see European Spanish, Latin American Spanish. Latin American Spanish? Like, that is a massive brush umbrella term with so many variations of Spanish included in that. Like, whew, really, most of the time, I think they mean Mexican Spanish a lot of the time, but there's just so much nuance. I was traveling in Latin America, like sort of 2017, 2018, and every country I would arrive in, it was like, okay, how do I say you? The most basic word. And, what should I use here? Should it be tú, usted, vos, vosotros? Like, which one should I be going for? And, it was like this learning experience every single time. Same language. Same language. And it happens with English too. You go from, if, for example, a really good example with English is the word thong, which here is a type of skimpy women's underwear. And in Australia means flip-flop sandal, the kind of
Yeah, the
sandal
flip
goes
flops, the
between your toes.
thongs. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. You don't want to get that wrong. You don't want to be learning Australian English and then come to the UK and say, where can I buy thongs? To a stranger?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And like before we jump on to the next point, I think it's also important that you bring it out, like exposing yourself to different accents and to different varieties of English, because that's something I experienced as a teacher. You always get like, if you because it's business, it's business. Like if the university or the institute has an agreement with this book publishing company that sells American English books, like, so all the information people are going to learn is American English or American pronunciation, how Americans sound. But then whenever they have to speak with somebody from New Zealand or Australia or from Scotland, for example, they struggle because they're so used to a single variety, or like to kind of a single variety of the accent, the pronunciation of the style of speaking, that they do not understand other accents. So like they have to get accustomed to these other accents and these other varieties.
I do in my own country. I go to some cities. I'm like, okay, let me just tune in to this accent. Okay, I understand now.
Yeah. Oh my God. What city are you from originally? Or what region are you from originally?
Originally, I grew up in an area called the Midlands, which is a very big, it's like north, south, and then the middle, the Midlands.
Okay.
Specifically, I grew up in a county called Northamptonshire. So kind of an hour north of London and an hour, if we're looking at a map, an hour right of Birmingham. So very central.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, because I've heard, for example, like the northern accents in the UK tend to be like trickier to understand, even for native speakers, even for like for English people, like the Southerners are going to have a hard time listening to as an accent from Glasgow, for example.
Glasgow, yeah, very, very, we would call it a thick accent, very thick. Newcastle, Liverpool. And it's very interesting that just these specific relatively small areas. I'm right now kind of an hour from Liverpool, and people here do not speak like in Liverpool. Just so close, but such a different accent.
Yeah. I do not understand the like. Is that the Geordie? Is that what you call it? The Geordie accent?
Geordie is Newcastle, Scouser is
That's
Liverpool.
Newcastle.
Yeah.
Scouser.
Yeah.
That's a Scouser accent. Okay.
That's
Okay.
the
Thanks
one.
for the clarification. All right. Let's go back on. Let's get back on track. And let's go back on speaking about the plateau. What are some strategies that you have gotten to learn about, or maybe you have applied yourself, we can use to move beyond that intermediate stage, that plateau stage? Yeah.
Well, firstly, it can feel so slow. I like to think of language learning in two phases, and they come and they go at different times. But we have these phases of speedy gains where our progress in time ratio is very closer to vertical, right? We're making a lot of progress in a short amount of time. Then we have steady growth, which is much more closer to a horizontal line on our graph, and we're making progress but over a longer period of time. And the majority of language learning is going to be steady growth. It's going to feel slow and steady, and we'll be wondering if we're progressing. And when we accept that, first of all, when we recognize, it's not going to always feel like I'm leaping every single week, that's the first thing. And that has been a huge help for me, especially because when I first started talking about languages on the internet and I was on YouTube, like learning languages and sharing about that every month. And I'm thinking, have I made enough, quote unquote, progress this month? What do I have to say for myself? Have I done enough? And so I think about this a lot, this idea of perception that we have and how much that impacts the amount that we learn and the way that we learn. Because if we feel, it's so important, if we feel that we're not making progress, that's going to affect how we show up when we're actually sat there with our textbooks or in our lessons or whatever it might be. So we have to recognize that first of all and know for ourselves that yes, we have this big long goal of fluency and feeling really good and comfortable, but we need to be looking out for those smaller wins along the way, right? And making sure that we're keeping track of that and having kind of milestones. And when I work with people, they're called milestones because that's what they are. They get us, it's almost like crossing a river. We jump from one stepping stone to the next rather than try and jump across the river and fall in and drown, right? And so that's something that's really important, is thinking, okay, I feel like I'm at a plateau. I feel like I've slowed down. How can I feel like I've got to the next stage? And it's not going to be jump, we've leapt. It is going to be a continuous, very, very slight, gradual incline of growth. So we probably won't even notice. So a big important thing that we need to be doing is to be having these little moments of regular review. Like once a month feels fine, where maybe it means that you are just checking in with yourself and kind of seeing how you feel about things. Are you doing the right activities? Are you doing enough? Does it feel good? But then also, if you're tracking your speaking and your writing and have some record of that, just recording in the voice notes app on your phone once a week, once a month, whatever feels doable, then you can go back and listen to what you did a month ago, 2 months ago, 3 months ago, and decide for yourself, you know what? I feel like I'm just still at the plateau. But I can hear the difference from me 3 months ago to me now when I listen back to that voice memo, So if we're tracking ourselves in some kind of way, then we've got something to look back on to recognize the progress, even when it feels slow. So that's really important because, like I say, it's not just this sudden leap. It's something gradual that we might not even notice. It's like watching a puppy grow up. If you live with that puppy, you just see it being cute. And then one day you're like, wow, when did you grow? Because you see it grow so gradually. But like your cousin's hairdresser that came round 7 months ago and now has come to see the puppy, they notice the difference. So we need to create that artificially, so to speak, for ourselves so that we can be spotting the difference. Otherwise, we're going to feel that we are stuck at the plateau. And like you said at the very beginning, it is a feeling. It's something that isn't necessarily an accurate representation of where we're at. But if we're tracking and we can listen back to ourselves, then we can recognize, you know what? I'm on the right track. I'm doing okay.
Hey there, if you're enjoying the podcast, imagine how much more progress you could make with consistent, specialized support every week. Introducing the Fluent English Pro membership, designed specifically for busy professionals like you who want to keep improving their English even on a busy schedule. You'll find fluency activities, tutorials, mini courses, vocabulary builders, and live events, all focused on work and business English. Whether it's mastering international meetings, doing presentations, or answering tricky emails, this space is built to help you grow. If you're serious about your communication skills, visit fluentenglishpro.com/members and subscribe today. That is fluentenglishpro.com/members. Let's turn your English into your biggest professional asset. That's great. That's great. You just answered a lot of the other questions I had on the list here. I'm going to recap a little bit, but I'm happy that you have very precise answers and like you're touching the key points for all of the aspects. So just trying to recap, I think there are two sides of it. One is the mindset side and the other is the actionable side. For the mindset side is first, the plateau is a perception, not a real thing. Yeah. So you have to embrace the fact that progress is going to be less flashy, if I can say that. It is going to take longer to become evident. So like embrace that. It's part of the thing, but you have to keep working on that. That will be one aspect. And on the actionable side, as you just mentioned, tracking your progress, either recording yourself on audio or video or taking note of the things that you feel are different now from 3 months in the past or 6 months in the past. Then you're gonna be aware. Okay, like something's going on here. Something's even in my case, and I'm sure it's been your case as well, Lindsay. I've been studying English for, I think for about 20 years now, since I had like started from zero, and I still learn and I still find in myself progress, like tiny bits of progress, but I feel that progress when, oh my God, I didn't know I knew this idiom, or I didn't know I knew this expression, or I didn't know I could speak about this particular topic in English. And that's so rewarding. And if like I think it's gonna continue happening for a lifetime.
Yeah. Yeah. That's the other thing I think when you get to the plateau is because we said that grammar ends, but language learning never has to end. There's always going to be something new, even after 20 years, even after 30, 40, 50, even after a lifetime, there's always going to be something new to learn. And that means that, like we said, it's all about feeling and perception, and that perception of what it will mean what does it mean to you when you've moved past the plateau, when you've got past the plateau? What does that actually look like? Are you imagining that you're just one day going to suddenly be 10 times more fluent? What does that actually feel like and look like? What's the kind of tangible way that we can track if we've got past the plateau? Do you know what I mean? So that's something I think is really important too, is like figuring out what's your expectation of what counts for you as having got past this.
All right, Lindsay. So here the next point comes to, do I need external support to move away from or to feel like I'm moving faster away from the plateau? Because we have the two scenarios where like some people want to fly solo and do things by themselves, and some other people may want that feedback either from a tutor or a teacher or a community, maybe because there are conversation clubs and the like. Which do you think works best, or what are the benefits from each one? Like, because I'm sure like there is no perfect way. Yeah. So what could be the benefits from doing it solo and from doing it with the support of a tutor or a community?
Good question. So you're going to know for yourself what feels better when you want to get that human feedback and interaction versus when you're happy to fly solo. I consider there to be 3 modes of self-review, right? So, and I call them all self-review because you are involved in all of them. For example, we have solo self-review, tech-assisted, and human-assisted. Now, even human-assisted, when I'm talking about like maybe part of that is, like you said, a community conversation club, for example, but it might be a teacher. So why is it still self-review? Because you're there with your teacher, going through, maybe you're listening to your recording together, maybe you're reading your written text together that you've done. You're not just handing it over and saying, there you go, teacher. and then coming back a week later, forgetting what you've done and looking at the notes going, okay, that's good enough, moving on. You know what I mean? And that's why I still think of it as self-review, because you want to be involved in that process. So if we're doing this solo, quite simply, we are assessing ourselves. I often like the idea of mistake goals, where rather than trying to avoid mistakes, a lot of learners have this fear of getting things wrong, right? If you're at the intermediate plateau, this isn't too big of an issue for you, but you can be saying to yourself, okay, I want to hit record and I want to speak until I notice 5 mistakes. So you're speaking and you're speaking and you're speaking, and then, okay, you're just clocking, you're reviewing yourself in real time, which is a really useful skill, because then in real life, when you're speaking, you'll be able to adjust and correct as you go as well. So really useful skill to develop. But also when we aim for mistakes rather than, avoid them, we're now, we've got this goal that is the thing that we previously weren't wanting to do. So that's really good. We're getting more speaking practice in. So solo review. Then we've got tech assisted. So this would be when you are using Google Translate, maybe ChatGPT, maybe you are like speaking. I noticed recently, I think it's only for maybe French, Spanish, and English right now, the conversation or the practice button on Google Translate. They've got a new button in beta mode at the minute, where you can speak and it will correct you and practice. Like, I'm intrigued. Yeah. So things like that, right? With this, what's really important if you're using tech-assisted review is that you teach yourself how to check the accuracy of that. Because what we don't want to be doing is just following it as gospel and saying, yep, cool, great, thank you, Google Translate, thank you, ChatGPT. We want to be able to know how to read between the lines of when it gets it right and when it gets it wrong. And then thirdly, human-assisted. So this is when you're with a tutor and you're going over stuff that you've done. This is when you are in a conversation class and asking for support or explanations, or, you're speaking with a loved one and it's their native language and you're, gently getting corrections in a way that feels good in that scenario. So that feedback is really important. How you get it is going to depend on your preferences, what you need right now, what's available to you right now as well. It might be that you want to kind of batch up your questions and keep a little tabs on them until you have maybe once a month a session with a tutor where you bring everything that you've got from that month, all the things that you've checked for yourself, that you've checked with tech, and you say, can you help me go through and make sure I've not got any mistakes with this? So something like that could work really well if you don't want to be adding in too many lessons or anything like that. But yeah, so you can do it solo, but obviously support and community is undoubtedly going to make things easier for most of us. But that type of support is really your call. Like, what feels like it's missing for you when you think about the speaking practice that perhaps you're now recognizing, okay, to break through this intermediate plateau for me, I want more speaking practice. I want more output. Does that feel like it's missing in general, just all speaking, or is it that it's conversation with other people that is missing? So you'll know what that looks like for you.
Yeah, listen to yourself. Like there is no one solution, one size fits all solution for everyone. You gotta identify what works for you, and as you just mentioned, what maybe you're missing, that you feel you're missing, or maybe what some friction points are. Like maybe at the moment of communicating or listening or writing, you feel your struggle. So that's where you need to work on a little bit more.
And that's a really good example of why it's so important to get practice at this stage. Because if you are just following through with, you've done textbook 1, textbook 2, you're now on book 3. And if you're just kind of blindly following through that, you're not necessarily getting the stuff that you need. It's like when we talked about advanced niche vocab. You might be like, yeah, tick, 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 I can understand those words now, but are you going to use them? So if you're using output as your guide for what should be your input and for what should be your practice, that's really, really a helpful way to help go beyond the plateau, because you're filling in the gaps that you need, that you're noticing and that others are noticing about you too.
Great. Okay, those are a lot of very important tips. I loved that you broke it down into like doing it by yourself, doing it with tech assisted tools, and doing it within a community or with a teacher. So that's great. So the three very, very amazing options. There is a lot more information we could discuss about this, Lindsay, but one, I think for our listeners, it will be like a big amount of information to process in one episode. And two, we could take hours talking about this, because there are so many aspects and so many little things we can discuss about this. If people want to continue learning about how they can see that progress, because there is progress, they can see that progress, or they can consciously move toward a new goal and improve their language from intermediate to advanced. They want to move away from that perceived plateau. Where can we follow you? Where can we learn more about the things we can do? Because I'm sure you have a lot of valuable content that people are gonna greatly benefit from here in this podcast.
Thank you. So lindsaydoeslanguages.com is my website. Lindsay is spelled the weirdest way, Lindsay. And there you'll find blogs, you'll find links to the podcast. On YouTube as well, I share a lot of videos about how to learn languages. And like I mentioned, I've been doing that a long time now. So this big, big old embarrassing archive to dig into over on YouTube. And then I work with my clients primarily in Language Life, which is a 12-month program where it's all about how to learn languages. You can speak confidently, really trust I call it your language gut, right? Really trust the decisions that you make for your languages and master that process. So you feel good about what you're doing. You feel confident moving forward. One more thing that will be really useful is I have a free list of resources. So there's plenty on there for English, and I think over like 150 other languages as well. So if anyone listening is learning English and another language, that is the ultimate language resource list. That's lindsaydoeslanguages.com/list as well to get that.
Amazing. So for everybody listening, all those links to the list, to Lindsay's website, to Lindsay's YouTube channel are going to be there in the description of this episode. So you go click, go subscribe to her YouTube channel, first of all, because that's where, and I don't know if I mentioned this, your YouTube channel is where I got the idea for this episode. And I love that all of your videos are like, they are very short, very to the point. That means it's easy to learn. Yeah. And everything is very actionable. So I really appreciate that. So everybody go subscribe to the show subscribe to the YouTube channel. Right now on the link. And Lindsay, thank you so much for all the information you have shared with us today.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. I like you said at the beginning, anytime I can talk to a fellow language nerd, I'm very excited to do so. So appreciate it. Thank you.